On the day our couple channel hit 30 million followers, the milestone video was supposed to be my official debut on camera. I woke up at 5 in the morning to do my makeup and tried on a dozen different dresses. However, right before the cameras rolled, Julian stopped me. "Willow, let's have Evangeline do it instead. She's just more camera ready. The fans will love her." Evangeline was my best friend. I stood frozen for a long time, but in the end I simply nodded. From that day on, Julian and Evangeline played a romantic couple on screen for 3 years. I stood behind the lens writing their scripts, setting up their lighting, and editing every single frame. I watched the comment section explode day after day. They look so deeply in love. My favorite ship ever. And I watched Julian hold Evangeline's hand with more and more ease. Until the night of our 3-year anniversary stream, when the host asked them a question live on camera. "When was the exact moment you two felt the strongest spark for each other?" Julian and Evangeline smiled in perfect sync. "The very first day we shot together on camera." In an instant, the live stream chat erupted into wild cheers and screams. Sitting in the dark corner of the studio behind the control monitor, my heart sank. They had spent 3 years pretending to be in love. And I was the only fool who treated it like an act. As soon as the broadcast wrapped, I logged into the channel dashboard and revoked all my admin access. Then I opened an email invitation for an overseas film project I had received 2 weeks ago and accepted it. From now on, I was done writing their love story. Once the live stream ended, the studio erupted into wild cheers. "We just hit 70 million followers. Happy 3rd anniversary, G-Line." Staff members wheeled in a massive celebration cake, topped with photos of Julian and Evangeline, flanked by their official ship name, G-Line. Evangeline laughed softly, throwing her head back in delight. Julian stood close beside her, instinctively stepping in to block the party poppers before the falling confetti could stain her dress. "Take it easy, guys. Don't ruin her outfit." His voice wasn't sharp, but the action was so effortless that it was clear he'd shielded her like this 1,000 times before. I sat behind the control panel, my headset still resting around my neck. The monitor was frozen on the final frame of the broadcast. Julian looking down at Evangeline, and Evangeline looking up at him with a glowing smile. The studio lights fell across their faces just right, like the picture-perfect climax of a long-planned romance. Someone walked past and clapped me on the shoulder. "Willow, that eye contact at the end was insane. If we chop that up into clips tonight, it's going to break the internet." I gave a quiet nod. "Got it." Over the past 3 years, that seemed to be the only word I ever said. "Got it, I'll write the script." "Got it, I'll edit out the bloopers." "Got it, I'll make them look like they're deeply in love." When it came time to cut the cake, the crowd started chanting for Julian and Evangeline to do it together. Evangeline looked over at Julian with a smile. "Is that okay?" Without hesitation, Julian reached out, placing his hand gently over hers as they held the knife handle together. The room exploded in cheers and applause. I lowered my head to wrap up the cables. A sharp piece of the connector sliced into my fingertip, leaving a stinging red line. Though it hurt a little, that tiny prick of pain was instantly swallowed by the dull, suffocating ache spreading through my chest. When this account first started, it wasn't called G-Line but Gillo, a space created by Julian and me. Back then he still got nervous in front of the lens. He'd butcher a simple opening line a dozen times in a row while I'd sit behind the camera, gently prompting him again and again. "Julian, look at the camera and smile. Soften your tone a little on this line." He would mess up his hair embarrassed. "Willow, am I that hopeless?" I'd raise the camera and laugh. "No way. You're the handsome one here." He would then stare straight into the lens, looking through it as if he were looking directly at me. "Once this account takes off, you're appearing on camera with me. I want everyone to know that you're my real leading lady." And I believed him. So for 3 whole years, while fans flooded the comments asking who the girl behind the camera was, I never rushed him. I genuinely believed that one day he'd take my hand and pull me into the spotlight. That was until the day we hit 30 million followers. Julian looked at me, dressed up and ready to finally go on camera, and said, "Willow, let's have Evangeline do it instead. She's just more camera ready." Honestly, it wasn't just Julian. Ever since I met Evangeline, I'd been living entirely in her shadow. Back in school, our classmates used to say, "Evangeline lights up the whole room, while Willow is so quiet." Even my own mom once sighed with a smile after meeting her. "She's such a gorgeous girl. I wish Evangeline were my daughter." Evangeline had immediately hooked her arm through mine, laughing it off. "Mrs. Foster, don't say that. Willow is 100 times better than me. She's so sweet and devoted. I'm actually jealous of you." My mother laughed, and I just lowered my head, smiling awkwardly. At the time, I truly considered Evangeline my best friend, because whenever people compared us, she was always the only one who stepped up to defend me. Later, I told Julian about all of it. He had held me tight, his brow furrowed in frustration. "Willow, don't listen to them. You're not anyone's sidekick. To me, you'll always be the best." I really believed him then. I believed Julian would be the one person who would always see me for who I was. In the end, he was the one who decided Evangeline looked better on camera. He knew better than anyone how much I hated being compared to Evangeline. Yet he was the very person who pushed me right back into her shadow. After that day, Evangeline became the leading lady in front of the camera. It was only natural for the fans to assume that she had written all those sweet, romantic lines and viral relationship moments. Overnight, the comment section exploded with tens of thousands of messages. So this is what his camera-shy girlfriend looks like. No wonder Julian hid her for so long. She's drop-dead gorgeous and writes the scripts? Total package. Julian and her are totally soulmates. Their visuals and chemistry are insane together. I sat at my desk, staring at the comments on my monitor, my entire body feeling numb and ice-cold. They didn't know that I wrote every single script, or that I had trained Julian exactly when to turn back, and precisely what kind of look to give the camera. But because Evangeline was the one standing in front of the lens, every bit of romance became credited as her innate talent. All my hard work transformed into her shining halo. I was like an uncredited ghost, having written every step of their love story, only to be erased from the final cut by the same people. That night, Julian rewatched the final edit over and over again. He pointed at Evangeline on the screen and said, "She really is built for the camera. Her face is so memorable, and she isn't afraid to put her emotions out there." Sitting beside him, I let out a quiet, monosyllabic hum. Noticeably aware of my silence, Julian reached over and ruffled my hair softly. "Willow, you're great too. Your energy is just softer, more reserved. You're not really built for these high-drama, intense expressions." He said it so gently, almost soothingly. "You belong behind the camera. You're calm, detail-oriented, and far better at managing the bigger picture." Once upon a time, words like that would have made me happy. It would have felt like he truly understood me. However, at that moment, as I looked at Evangeline's vibrant, radiant face on the screen, I caught a glimpse of my own plain, pale reflection against the black monitor. A sharp, quiet pang pierced through my chest. There was no blood, but the pain made it hard to breathe. The celebration party raged on in the studio. Evangeline suddenly leaned down and rubbed her ankle, which Julian noticed immediately. He turned around, grabbed a pair of flat sneakers from a shopping bag nearby, and crouched in front of her. "Didn't I tell you not to wear those heels?" He scolded gently as he unbuckled her shoes and slipped the flats onto her feet. The crowd around them began teasing again. "Julian is way too whipped. No wonder fans say it doesn't look like acting." I stood a short distance away, holding a coiled power cord. My mind unexpectedly flashed back to a shoot 3 years ago, when I was supposed to be on camera for the first time. I had put on a pair of brand new heels to match a white dress I'd spent weeks preparing. I was on my feet for 6 straight hours that day. The heels chafed my ankles raw, blood sticking to the inside of the shoes. When Julian saw it, he only frowned and said, "Willow, bear with it a little longer. Today is huge for us. Don't throw off the shooting schedule." I nodded, gritted my teeth, and stepped back under the harsh studio lights. Yet in the end, the person standing in front of the camera was never me. After swapping into her flats, Evangeline walked over to me holding 2 glasses of champagne. "Willow, when you edit tonight's footage, could you extend that eye contact scene between Julian and me by a few seconds?" The fans seemed to love that moment. "Sure," I replied softly. Evangeline's face suddenly softened into a look of slight guilt. She gently took my hand. "Honestly, I get so anxious sometimes. You're Julian's actual girlfriend, yet I'm the one forced to pretend to be a couple with him on camera." She lowered her gaze, her voice dropping into a soft, vulnerable tone. "If it weren't for the account, and for all the blood, sweat, and tears you and Julian put into this for years, I would never hold his hand, hug him, or film those romantic scenes. Willow, you don't take it personally, right? It's just work." Work. That word was such a convenient shield. Julian holding her hand was work, as was Julian kneeling to change her shoes. So what was this suffocating, heavy ache in my chest? Was that part of the job description too? If it was, then this job hurt too damn much. It hurt so badly that quitting felt less like stepping down, and more like running for my life. Just then, the head of brand partnerships walked over, holding a fresh contract. "Willow, the brand wants us to shoot a marriage proposal theme for the next installment. They want to ride the hype from tonight's 3rd anniversary stream." I froze, snapping my head up in shock. "A proposal?" The business rep smiled enthusiastically. "Exactly. The brand said they want a destined for each other vibe. With Julian and Evangeline blowing up right now, if we shoot a proposal, it's guaranteed to break the internet." My fingers froze on the page. When Julian and I first got together, he promised me that once our account hit 10 million followers, he would propose. After hitting 10 million, he said he was too busy and told me to wait until 50 million. Then, at 50 million, the channel was apparently in a crucial growth phase, and going public with our relationship would ruin our traction. Now the account had 70 million followers, and the proposal shoot was finally here. Yet the bride standing in front of the camera still wasn't me. Julian walked over and glanced at the contract. This looks good. He turned to look at me. Willow, you handle the script. Evangeline said she wants a snow-capped mountain, a ring, and a tear-jerking confession. You're the best at crafting that kind of romantic atmosphere. His tone was completely natural. It seemed he had completely forgotten that a snow-capped mountain proposal was the exact setting I had always dreamed of. A long time ago, I showed him a photo of a mountain range covered in fresh snow. I had told him, Julian, if you ever propose to me, I want it to be in the snow. Back then, he held me close, laughing softly. All right. When the time comes, my Willow is going to be the most beautiful bride on that mountain. I lowered my eyes, staring at the words, marriage proposal theme printed on the contract. It felt as if something heavy was slowly crushing my heart. Not a sharp pain, but a suffocating, unending ache that made it impossible to breathe. I looked up at him. What about me? Julian paused at first, caught off guard. Quickly, he softened his voice. Willow, don't overthink this. It's just a commercial shoot. Once we wrap up this project, I'll make it up to you with a real proposal. I stared at him, suddenly finding myself completely speechless. So the snow-capped mountain proposal I had waited years for could be delayed for Evangeline, too. She got to wear the wedding dress and the ring, hear his confession, and receive everyone's blessings first. Only then would it be my turn to stand on the snow where Evangeline had already stood, leaving me with a rehearsed rerun of a moment that was supposed to be ours. Just like everything else I'd received over the past few years, I was forever second to Evangeline, forever handed down whatever was left behind after she took her turn. I looked down at the contract, a numb, bitter ache overflowing in my chest. If the moment was something he could just recycle for another woman, he could keep it. And as for Julian, I was done waiting for him. When I got home, Julian seemed to realize that I had been unhappy all day. He wrapped his arms around me from behind, his voice dropping into a soft, coaxing tone. Willow, don't be mad that I didn't pay enough attention to you today. His hand settled naturally on my waist. In the past, whenever he hugged me like this, my heart would instantly soften. But this time, I gently pushed him away. I'm a little tired. Julian froze. He looked at me for a few long seconds before letting out a low, tired sigh. All right. Get some rest then. With that, he picked up his phone and headed into the bathroom. As the shower started running, the tablet resting on the nightstand suddenly lit up. Julian's messaging app was still logged in. A text from Evangeline popped up. Did you manage to soothe her? No, Julian replied almost instantly. She actually pushed me away just now. Evangeline sent back a laughing emoji. Ouch. How bruised is your ego? A few seconds passed before Julian typed back. Not really. Honestly, I'm glad she turned me down. After being together for so many years, I'm kind of tired of it. I can barely bring myself to be interested in her these days. I stared at those lines of text, the warmth from my fingertips draining bit by bit until they were ice cold. So even just coming near me had become a chore Julian had to force himself through. Still, I didn't cry and kept scrolling. Their chat history felt endless. It was pages longer than my own text thread with Julian. Early on, my name appeared frequently in their chats. Willow was on set all day today. Do her feet still hurt? They hurt, but she's stubborn and won't say it out loud. I'll buy her some ointment later. Reading those early messages, my heart fluttered slightly. They really used to care about me. But as I scrolled further down, my name appeared less and less. They started chatting about their shoots, the sunsets, and the new earrings Evangeline had bought. I slowly dissolved into a stray, offhand sentence wedged between their days. Willow's been getting so sensitive lately. It's clearly just work, but she always acts like she's the victim. Don't be too hard on her. She just cares about you too much. However, Evangeline's very next line read, though to be fair, she really isn't built for being on camera. That quiet vibe of hers just makes the whole frame feel cold. A dry, sarcastic smirk tugged at the corner of my lips. Witnessing the double betrayal of my boyfriend and best friend, an overwhelming exhaustion suddenly settled into my bones. I was so tired that even feeling heartbroken felt like a waste of energy. Fortunately, in just 3 days, I would be getting on a plane abroad, never to serve as the backdrop for their love story ever again. The day of my flight happened to be the same as the proposal shoot. At the foot of the snow-capped mountain, the wind blew fiercely. Evangeline stood in the center of the frame, draped in a flowing white gown, looking so stunningly gorgeous that it resembled a carefully packaged dream. Julian stood opposite her in a tailored black overcoat, a velvet ring box resting in his hand. I stood behind the control monitor, my fingers stiff from the cold. I finished writing the proposal script just last night. The snowy mountain, the ring, the heartfelt confession. Every single detail was something I had once secretly envisioned for myself. When Julian had finished reading the script, he had smiled and praised me. Willow, you really get me. Evangeline is going to love this. I had only lowered my head with a faint smile, never telling him that it was never written for Evangeline in the first place. Action. Julian dropped to one knee, looking up at Evangeline as he recited the lines I had written. I want to walk through countless snowy nights with you. I want the entire world to know that you are my one and only leading lady. With tears brimming in her eyes, Evangeline reached out her hand, and Julian slid the ring onto her finger. The fit was perfect. Standing behind the monitor, I watched them embrace on screen. I felt so silly, stuck in the shadows behind the camera, watching someone else live out the life that was supposed to be mine. Once the director called cut, everyone crowded around the monitor to review the footage. The snow, the white gown, the ring. The imagery was breathtakingly cinematic. Julian and Evangeline looked so genuine that it felt impossible to fake. Julian suddenly walked over to my side. As if terrified someone might catch us, he discreetly reached out and slipped his fingers into mine. Then, slipping a second ring box from his coat pocket, he murmured, "Willow, that was just for the campaign. This one's yours." I had waited so long for this exact moment, for him to step away from the lens and choose me with absolute certainty. Yet as he slid the band onto my ring finger, not a single ripple of emotion stirred within me. The ring slid loosely down my skin. It was a full size too big, exactly Evangeline's size. Julian froze, sputtering out a quick explanation under his breath. "I must have picked up the wrong size. I'll exchange it when we get back." I stared at the ill-fitting ring, too exhausted to even force a smile. A shout called out from down the snowy trail. "Julian, let's hit the after party." Julian glanced back at me. "Willow, I'm going to head over first. Finish up the edits, then come join us, okay?" I gave him a soft nod. Okay. That was the last time I would ever say okay to him, because I was never going back. While they were at the after party, I returned to the hotel alone to pack my bags. On my laptop, every project file and edit was neatly cataloged. Opening the channel dashboard, I systematically revoked every administrative access tied to my account. By midnight, I was sitting alone on an outbound flight. Outside the window, the snow-covered landscape slowly shrank into the distance. I didn't look back once. This was the last love story I would ever write for them, and the final scene I would leave behind for Julian. Wherever I landed next, be it a snowfield or coast, I would never come back to him. Meanwhile, back at the celebration, Julian opened the final video file. His fingers suddenly faltered on the trackpad. He stared fixedly at the words "Final Cut," his heart skipping a heavy, unexplainable beat. A second later, a notification chimed on his screen. The instant Julian read the message, the easy smile froze on his face. He jolted upright, and the color drained from his face. It was an automated system alert from the channel dashboard. Willow Foster removed themselves as channel admin. Channel ownership, script archives, and raw assets transfer complete. Julian stared at the lines, the buzz from the alcohol vanishing instantly. Beside him, someone raised a glass. "Julian, tonight's final edit is absolute art. This G-line proposal shoot is going to break the internet." Julian didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the screen as a hollow void opened in his chest. It felt as though the foundation of everything he'd built had just been pulled out from under him. He immediately dialed my number. The first call went unanswered, as did the second call. By the third try, the only response was the robotic automated operator informing him the phone was switched off. Julian stood up abruptly, his chair clattering backward onto the floor. Evangeline jumped, startled. "Julian, what's wrong?" Without looking at her, he grabbed his car keys and bolted out the door. When he burst into the hotel room, it was pitch black and silent. My luggage and primary camera were gone. The only thing left on the nightstand was the ill-fitting ring resting on a simple note. "Julian, the final cut is uploaded. From now on, write your own love stories." Julian stood frozen in place, motionless for a long time. In that moment, he finally remembered how the ring had slid loosely off my finger when he put it on earlier. At the time he had simply said, "I picked up the wrong size. I'll exchange it later." But he had never stopped to think that the ring I had waited so many years for could not be so easily dismissed with a comment about a wrong size. More absurdly, he had bought it in Evangeline's size. Julian gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white from the strain. His phone vibrated in his palm. It was from the manager. "Julian, what's going on with Willow?" She stripped all her admin permissions. "Who's supposed to handle the scripts for the next few shoots?" The silence in the hotel room was not empty. It was dense, like the air inside a sealed vacuum. Julian stood by the unmade bed, the note clutched in his hand until the cheap hotel stationery tore at the folds. On the glass nightstand, the platinum ring caught the faint yellow glow of the hallway light. It was a size 7. Evangeline wore a 7. Willow had always worn a 5. He had stood in the jewelry boutique in downtown Chicago 2 weeks ago running his thumb over the velvet displays. When the jeweler asked for the circumference, Julian had hesitated, his mind immediately conjuring the image of Evangeline's slender, manicured hands gesturing animatedly across a dinner table. He hadn't even thought to check the small silver ring Willow had left on their bathroom counter for 4 years. "She's just cooling off," Julian muttered aloud, his voice bouncing hollowly off the dark walls. She does this. She gets overwhelmed, goes to her mother's place, and by Tuesday she's back with groceries. He reached for his phone and dialed Mrs. Foster's landline. The phone rang 4 times before a sleepy, irritated voice answered. Hello. Mrs. Foster, it's Julian. Is Willow there? A long pause stretched over the line. Julian? It's 2 in the morning. Willow. Why would she be here? She told me 2 weeks ago she was taking an overseas research fellowship for a film studio. Julian's breath hitched in his throat. A fellowship? Yes. She said she signed the contracts last month, Mrs. Foster said, her tone shifting into mild confusion. Didn't you help her pack? She said you were entirely supportive of her stepping out from behind your channel. The line hummed with static. Julian's hand went numb around the receiver. He ended the call without saying goodbye. Last month, for 30 days, while he was reviewing sponsorship decks with Evangeline, while he was laughing over wine in hotel lounges, while he was casually telling Willow that she wasn't built for the camera, she had been quietly dismantling her life beside him, brick by brick, without a single argument. When he arrived at the studio the following afternoon, the office was in complete disarray. The post-production suite, usually quiet and dark, was filled with frantic voices. Marcus, their senior brand manager, was pacing the hallway with a tablet pressed to his ear, his collar damp with sweat. What do you mean the color profile is corrupt? Marcus shouted into the phone. Just apply the standard LUT. Julian pushed past the glass doors. What's going on? Marcus spun around, his face pale. Julian, thank God. The luxury watch brand saw the rough cut of the proposal video. They love the footage, but they want the 5-minute extended narrative version uploaded by 6 o'clock tonight for the campaign launch. Where is the project file? On the server, Julian said, walking toward Willow's desk. She always leaves the master exports in the shared drive. He sat down in her ergonomic chair, pulled the mechanical keyboard toward him, and woke the dual monitors. The desktop was immaculate. There were no cluttered folders, no temporary render files, no desktop sticky notes. In the center of the screen sat a single folder labeled archive_master. Inside, every video from the past 3 years was meticulously organized by date, resolution, and audio stem. Every contract, every invoice, every raw camera log was categorized with clinical, terrifying precision. And beside the folder lay a text file titled read_me_handover.txt. Julian clicked it open. To the production team. 1. The master LUTs used for Julian's skin tone are proprietary. They have been removed. You will need to recalibrate the red channel gain on the Sony FX9S to compensate for his uneven tanning. 2. Evangeline tends to speak at 1.3x speed when nervous. In the proposal video, her audio has been manually time-stretched in frames 1400 to 2200 to preserve emotional weight. Do not use autosync. 3. Script outlines for Q3 and Q4 are deleted. As I am no longer under contract, the intellectual property for the Starlight and Midnight narrative arcs remains registered under my personal copyright. 4. All administrative credentials have been transferred to Marcus. Good luck with the 70 million. WF. Julian stared at the screen. What does it mean the LUTs are gone? Evangeline's voice drifted from the doorway. She walked in wearing an oversized cashmere knit and dark designer sunglasses, holding an iced matcha latte. She looked around the suite with a faint frown. Why is everyone panicking? It's just an edit. Can't the assistant editor just slap a warm filter over it and hit export? Shut up, Evangeline, Julian snapped, his voice dropping into a low, vicious register that made the room freeze. Evangeline's jaw dropped. She lowered her sunglasses, her eyes wide with shock. In 3 years, Julian had never spoken to her with anything less than doting adoration. Excuse me? She whispered, her lip trembling. You don't know anything about editing, Julian said, his eyes still glued to the monitor, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the desk edge. You think you just stand there, smile, and the magic happens? She spent 14 hours on every single 8-minute video. She cleaned your audio line by line because you can't hit a consonant without popping the microphone. Julian. Evangeline's face flushed bright red with humiliation as the junior staff looked down at their keyboards. I was only trying to help. You were the one who said she was replaceable. I said she was better behind the camera. Julian roared, slamming his open palm against the desk, rattling the dual monitors. I didn't say she was replaceable. The room fell into a suffocating, petrified silence. Evangeline looked at him, her eyes welling with real tears of fury before spinning on her heel and storming out of the suite, her heels clicking violently against the hardwood. Julian sat alone in the center of the darkened room. He reached out, his trembling fingers resting on the mouse, and clicked open the raw, unedited footage of the snowy mountain proposal. On the high-resolution monitor, the camera was unsteady for 3 seconds before finding its focus. In the corner of the frame, reflected in the polished glass of the production van behind him, was a tiny blurred figure wrapped in an oversized black down coat, holding the heavy stabilizer with red, chapped hands. She had stood in the sub-zero wind for 4 hours to capture him smiling at another woman, and she had never once asked him to turn the camera toward her. The collapse did not happen with an explosion. It happened like a slow, structural rot beneath a gilded floor. Without Willow's direction, the 5-minute extended proposal video uploaded at 6 o'clock was an unmitigated disaster. The assistant editor, desperate to meet the brand deadline, oversaturated the colors, turning the pristine white snow into an unnatural, blinding blue-white that washed out the actor's features. Evangeline's voice sounded thin and nasal, without Willow's frame-by-frame EQ adjustments, and the pacing, which had once felt like a slow cinematic breath, dragged on like a poorly rehearsed soap opera. Within 20 minutes of the upload, the comment section began to shift. At cinephile_Sam. Why does this look like an iPhone commercial from 2014? Where did the filmic tone go? At Velvet Sky. Wait, is it just me, or does their chemistry feel completely hollow without the subtle micro-cuts? The eye contact feels so forced here. At Nordic_Lens. The lighting on Evangeline's cheek is completely blown out. Who graded this? This isn't the same director who shot the Autumn series. By morning, the video had received 60,000 dislikes, a first in the channel's history. Worse still, the luxury watch brand's marketing director called Marcus directly at 9 in the morning, threatening a breach of contract lawsuit if the aesthetic standards of the campaign were not immediately restored. We need scripts, Marcus said during an emergency production meeting on Thursday, his voice hollow with exhaustion. The brand wants a 3-part holiday special starting next week. Evangeline, you said you had concepts. Evangeline sat at the head of the conference table, her notebook open. For 3 years, she had smiled during interviews whenever hosts asked about their storytelling process, nodding demurely while letting the public assume she was the creative soul behind the romantic dialogues. Now, under the harsh fluorescent lights of the meeting room, her notebook contained 3 short bullet points. A cozy cabin with a fireplace. Julian gives me a diamond bracelet in the snow. We drink hot cocoa and talk about our future. Marcus stared at the page for 10 seconds. That's it. It's classic. Evangeline defended herself, her voice defensive and shrill. Fans love classic romance. Willow's scripts were always so melancholic and pretentious anyway. People want to see us happy. Willow's pretentious scripts generated 40 million impressions and 12 luxury sponsorships, Marcus said flatly, tossing his pen onto the glass table. What you wrote is a high school creative writing prompt. We can't shoot this. Then hire a freelance writer. Evangeline snapped, crossing her arms. They hired 4. Over the next 3 weeks, 4 different elite commercial screenwriters were brought into the studio. They were paid astronomical rates to mimic the distinct, understated poetry of the G-Line channel. They failed. One writer made Julian sound like an aggressive alpha male romance novel lead. Another wrote dialogue so saccharine and artificial that even the most loyal fan accounts posted cringe compilations on TikTok. The viewers weren't fools. For 3 years, they hadn't fallen in love with Julian or Evangeline. They had fallen in love with Willow's gaze. They had fallen in love with the way the camera lingered on a trembling hand, the way the ambient light softened when a character hesitated before speaking, the unspoken melancholy beneath a lover's smile. Julian was merely an actor reading lines written by a woman who had loved him with terrifying, silent devotion. And Evangeline was nothing more than a mannequin dressed in someone else's dream. By the end of the month, the channel had lost 400,000 followers. 3 Tier 1 brand sponsorships were quietly put on hold, and Julian began drinking. He would sit in his empty apartment on the north side, scrolling through the raw footage archives on his laptop until 4 in the morning. He watched the outtakes from their early days, back when the channel had only 3,000 subscribers, back when they shot on a battered Canon 5D in a damp basement apartment. In one outtake, he had flubbed his lines 6 times in a row, freezing in front of the lens with red ears. From behind the camera, a soft, clear voice had laughed, a sound like silver bells in a quiet room. Julian breathed. Don't look at the glass like it's a judge. Look at it like it's me. On the screen, his 22-year-old self had smiled, his eyes lighting up with genuine, radiant warmth. I am looking at you, Willow. Julian pressed his forehead against the cold keys of his laptop, his shoulders convulsing in the dark as a dry, ragged sob tore from his chest. He had spent 3 years looking through the lens at a shadow, entirely forgetting that the light had always been standing in the cold, holding the glass. Edinburgh in December smelled of coal smoke, damp stone and the sharp salted wind blowing in from the Firth of Forth. Inside a converted 19th century warehouse near the port of Leith, the atmosphere was thick with industrial haze, the smell of fresh timber, and the electric hum of 40-foot studio rigs. Hold the key light on the left archway. A woman's voice called out, calm, steady, and resonant through the high-ceilinged soundstage. Drop the fill by. Half a stop. I want the shadow to cut across his collarbone before he turns. The lighting technicians moved instantly, adjusting the heavy C-stands without a word of protest. I stood behind the primary monitor array, wearing a thick charcoal turtleneck, my dark hair twisted up with a wooden pencil, a pair of lightweight directors, headphones resting around my neck. Willow, a deep accented voice spoke from behind me. Christian Vance, the Scottish-French director whose indie features had won 2 Silver Bears at Berlin, walked over holding 2 paper cups of black coffee. He was 40, with graying temples, sharp obsidian eyes, and the impatient, razor-sharp mind of a true cinematic visionary. He handed me a cup, leaning his hip against the monitoring console, looking at the frame I had just composed on the screen. That framing is brutal, Christian murmured, his eyes tracking the contrast between the stone wall and the actor's silhouette. It makes him look completely isolated without saying a single word of exposition. Loneliness doesn't need dialogue, Christian, I said softly, taking a sip of the hot coffee. It just needs negative space. Christian turned his head, studying my face for a long moment with quiet, unmasked respect. When Lucian told me he found a commercial web editor in New York who understood French New Wave pacing better than most festival veterans, I thought he was exaggerating. Christian smiled, swirling his coffee. 3 weeks on this set, and you've cut 2 days off our shooting schedule and rewritten our third act into something human. I spent 7 years learning how to make ordinary things look like art. I replied, my eyes fixed on the waveform monitors. It turns out, when you're working with real actors, it's much easier. Christian chuckled. The producers want to submit the rough cut to Venice in August. I want your name on the primary card. Co-visual director and screenplay collaboration. My heart gave a faint, clean flutter. Not the anxious, suffocating thud I used to feel in that commercial studio, but a wide, boundless swell of professional pride. Thank you, Christian. Don't thank me, Willow. You built the frame. You deserve the credit. As the crew prepared for the next setup, my phone vibrated in the pocket of my coat. It was an international number from New York. I didn't answer. I had changed my primary SIM card 3 weeks ago. Only my legal counsel and the International Guild had this temporary relay line. A text notification followed. Unknown number. Willow, please. Just 5 minutes. I'm at the studio. Everything is falling apart. Evangeline. She doesn't know how to do any of it. The channel is dying. I bought the size 5. I have it in my pocket right now. Tell me where you are. I will fly anywhere. I read the message once. The words looked small on the screen, like dead leaves trapped under ice. 3 years ago, 3 months ago, even 3 weeks before I left, a text like this would have shattered my resolve. It would have sent me running through the rain to fix his color grading, to rewrite his scripts, to soothe his bruised ego, while swallowing my own blood. Now, standing beneath the soaring steel rafters of an international film stage, surrounded by artists who valued every syllable I wrote, I felt nothing. No rage. No spiteful triumph. Only the profound, tranquil indifference of a person who had finally walked out of a tiny, suffocating room into the vast, open winter sky. I tapped the screen, selected block and delete, and slipped the phone back into my pocket. Crew ready on track 3. I called out, stepping toward the camera dolly. Let's take it from the top. In New York, the winter was bitter, gray, and unforgiving. The G-Line studio in Manhattan was no longer a place of celebration. The white celebration cake from their 3rd anniversary had long since been thrown away, but the sugar ants still crawled across the corner baseboards where the cleaners had missed a spot. What do you mean she blocked the relay number? Julian screamed, slamming his phone against the glass whiteboard in his private office. The screen shattered into a fine spiderweb of cracks, the display flickering black. Marcus stood in the doorway, his coat buttoned up, holding a cardboard box filled with his personal desk items. I'm leaving, Julian, Marcus said quietly. Julian froze, his chest heaving, his tie crooked, dark purple bags hanging beneath his bloodshot eyes. What? I handed my resignation to the board this morning, Marcus said, his voice completely flat. Aura Media offered me a position as their talent director. Half the production crew has already put in their 2 weeks. You can't leave. Julian stepped forward, his hands shaking. We have 70 million followers. We are the biggest couple brand on the platform. We had 70 million, Marcus corrected him, pointing a finger toward the main studio floor. You've dropped to 66 million in 40 days. The Algorithm has flagged the engagement drop. The watch company sued us yesterday for $1.2 million in liquidated damages because the holiday campaign bombed. Marcus looked at Julian with an expression that was worse than anger. It was unadulterated pity. You never understood what the product was, Julian. You thought the audience wanted to watch a handsome boy and a pretty girl, but the internet is full of pretty faces. Marcus picked up his box. They weren't watching you. They were watching the way Willow loved you through that lens. When she stopped loving you, the camera stopped lying. And now, everyone sees you for what you actually are. An insecure, mediocre model who couldn't even remember his girlfriend's ring size. The heavy glass door closed with a soft, final click. Julian stood alone in the hallway. From the makeup room down the corridor, a sudden crash echoed. Julian walked over, pushing the door open with a dull thud. Evangeline stood in front of the three-way vanity mirror, her designer dress rumpled, a spilled bottle of high-end liquid foundation dripping down the glass, like thick beige blood. Her phone was mounted on a small ring light on the counter. The red light was on. She had been doing a live stream, a desperate, unscripted attempt to connect with fans and clear her name after a gossip account alleged that she had pushed Willow out of the production team. They're calling me a parasite, Julian. Evangeline shrieked, spinning around, her eyes wild, her makeup smeared across her cheeks. Look at the comments. They're spamming snake emojis. They're tagging the brands. Someone leaked our hotel registry from the ski resort last year. Julian didn't look at the comments. He looked at her face. Under the harsh, uncalibrated white ring light, without Willow's soft focus, diffusion filters, without the subtle 50mm lens compression that smoothed her sharp jawline, Evangeline looked ordinary. Her expression was pinched, bitter, and sharp with an ugly, frantic entitlement. Why are you staring at me like that? Evangeline yelled, lunging toward him, grabbing his lapels. Fix this. You're the face of the brand. Go on camera and tell them Willow was just an employee. Tell them she was toxic. Tell them she tried to break us up. Julian looked down at her hands on his jacket. He remembered Willow's hands, the faint white scars on her knuckles from adjusting hot tungsten lamps, the calluses on her index finger from turning focus gears in the cold. She wasn't an employee, Julian said, his voice barely louder than a whisper. Evangeline froze. What? She was my wife. Julian choked out, the word tearing at his throat like broken glass. In everything that mattered. She was the only real thing in my life. And I threw her into the dark, so you could take selfies in the snow. He shoved Evangeline's hands off his chest. Get out. Julian, get out of my studio, he roared, sweeping his arm across the vanity counter, sending makeup palettes, glass bottles, and ring lights crashing to the floor in a deafening explosion of plastic and powder. Evangeline screamed, stumbling backward, tripping over her own high heels, landing hard on the carpet among the shattered glass. She looked up at him with pure, venomous hatred. You're pathetic, Julian, she spat, wiping blood from a tiny scratch on her wrist. You think you're an artist? You're a hollow puppet. Without her you're nothing. You'll be broke and forgotten by next winter. She grabbed her coat from the chair, scrambled to her feet, and bolted out the emergency exit. Julian stood in the wreckage of the makeup room. On the floor, half buried under the spilled foundation and shattered mirror shards, the phone on the ring light was still broadcasting live. The screen was scrolling at lightning speed. At Truestory 99, holy shit. He admitted it. At Daily Drama, the whole thing was a lie. Willow was his real girlfriend. At Lenscraft, clip that. Send it to every sponsor. The entire channel is over. Julian stared into the tiny red camera lens. For the first time in his life, there was no one standing behind it to tell him where to look, how to smile, or when to breathe. There was only the cold, unblinking glass, reflecting a man who had completely erased himself. 7 months later, late August, the Adriatic Sea was a sheet of hammered gold beneath the late afternoon sun. The 81st Venice International Film Festival was in full swing, the historic Palazzo del Cinema draped in crimson banners, surrounded by hundreds of international press photographers, television crews, and cinema enthusiasts, lining the waterfront promenade of the Lido. Outside the main premiere hall for the official Horizons competition, the crowd erupted into a roar of camera shutters as a sleek wooden water taxi pulled up to the private dock. Christian Vance stepped out first, wearing an impeccably tailored black tuxedo, offering his hand with broad, protective warmth toward the cabin. A woman stepped onto the wooden pier. I wore a bespoke, backless midnight blue silk velvet gown that fell in clean, sculptural lines to the floor, my dark hair styled in an elegant, modern French twist secured with a minimalist silver pin. My skin was radiant under the golden Italian sun, my posture straight, graceful, and unyielding. Around my wrist, there was no oversized ring, no heavy jewelry, only a vintage Like a mechanical light meter on a slender leather cord. Director Vance. Miss Foster. Over here. Miss Foster, look to the left. The flashbulbs detonated in a continuous, deafening wave of white light. I didn't squint. I didn't look down. I looked directly into the primary center lens of the International Press Corps, my lips curving into a calm, effortless, and radiant smile. For 3 years, I had believed that I belonged only in the dark, that my voice was too quiet, my energy too reserved, my face too plain to exist in the light. I had forgotten that the person who holds the torch is the one who commands the dawn. Inside the Grand Theater, 1,300 critics, producers, and industry veterans sat in velvet seats. For 2 hours, the screen illuminated the dark hall with the visual poetry of our film, The Coldest Hearth, a story of quiet survival, of women who build worlds in the snow, of words left unspoken until the ice finally breaks. When the final frame faded to black, a long, breathtaking shot of an open horizon, melting into golden light, the theater remained silent for 3 full seconds. Then the applause began. It started in the center stalls, spreading outward like a shockwave, until all 1,300 people were on their feet, a 10-minute standing ovation that shook the gilded ceiling of the palazzo. On the stage, Christian pulled me into a tight, emotional embrace before stepping back and gesturing for me to take the microphone. I stepped forward into the spotlight. The light was warm. It did not burn. It did not blind. Thank you, I said, my voice carrying clear, steady, and beautiful through the grand hall. For a long time, I thought that love was about standing in the dark, so someone else could shine. I looked out over the sea of rising ovations, my eyes bright with a peaceful, untainted clarity. I know now that true art does not ask you to erase yourself. It asks you to step into the light, claim your frame, and tell your own story. The applause roared again, louder than the tide against the Venetian stone. In a small windowless basement apartment on the outskirts of Queens, the air smelled of stale instant noodles and damp concrete. Julian sat on the edge of an old mattress, an open bottle of cheap rye whiskey, resting between his bare feet. The room was illuminated only by the harsh, flickering blue glare of a second-hand television screen. On the screen, the International Arts broadcast was playing the live coverage from the Venice Film Festival. The camera zoomed in on a woman standing on the stage of the Palazzo del Cinema, holding a silver trophy against her chest, surrounded by international directors, and smiling with a radiance that took his breath away. She was wearing midnight blue. Her face was luminous, her dark eyes clear and sharp, her smile completely free of the quiet, melancholic exhaustion that had shadowed her youth. Julian leaned forward, his trembling, dirty fingers reaching out toward the glass screen. Willow, he whispered, his voice cracked, hoarse and ruined. On the screen, a reporter asked her a question through the translation feed. Miss Foster, your visual framing in the third act has been called one of the most romantic, devastating achievements of contemporary cinema. Where did you find the inspiration for that kind of love? On the screen, Willow looked into the camera. She didn't look angry. She didn't look hurt. She looked at the lens with the polite, distant, and untroubled detachment of a person looking at a pebble on a distant road. I used to think that love was something you had to script, rehearse, and perform. Willow smiled faintly, her voice smooth as silk over the broadcast speakers. Now I know that when love is real, it doesn't need an actor. And when it's gone, it leaves no ghost behind. The screen shifted to the closing credits of the festival broadcast. Julian sat in the dark. He looked down at his right hand. In his palm rested a small, worn velvet box, its corners frayed and dirty. Inside lay a size 5 platinum band, purchased with the last $1,000 he had drawn from his frozen credit card 6 months ago. He tried to close his fingers around it. The metal was ice cold. It didn't warm his skin. It didn't bring back the smell of fresh coffee on a winter morning. It didn't bring back the soft, gentle voice that had once whispered, "You're the handsome one here." The television screen went black, cutting off the light entirely. In the dark room, Julian Seibert dropped the velvet box onto the dirty linoleum floor, curled his knees to his chest, and buried his face in his hands, weeping into the empty silence of a world he had completely destroyed. Outside, the autumn wind blew through the city streets, sweeping away the fallen leaves, moving forward into a dawn that belonged, wholly and forever, to someone else.